If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the most scary supernatural being or entity that you or someone close to you claims to have experienced? One day, I was at a friend's house. This friend had a four-wheeler and a trail that was also in her backyard. It was the afternoon, and we were riding around before we went past this one part that had a bridge going over a little ditch. On that bridge, I saw a complete black figure standing on it. It wasn't see-through, though, and it was standing in the light. It looked as dark as the darkest black to be known. I asked my friend who that was, and she said it was her neighbor. The next thing, though, was that it was becoming dark, so we had the headlight on the four-wheeler. There was this turn that would go into a straight path that had a few trees in the way. We went to take the turn, and we were driving when I saw this weird see-through hand come out from the side of the forest and grab her neck. I got freaked out, closed my eyes, and next thing I knew, it was gone. When I was about 10, my mother told me a story about an incident that happened to her and a friend when they were both little girls around the age of 7 or 8. They were both in my grandparents' basement playing tea party when they heard a shuffling noise across the room. They both looked up and saw a life-sized woodpecker standing on the other side of the room. He walked over to the furnace, turned towards them, and smiled. My mother and her friend have both told me, independently of each other, that when he smiled, he had huge, sharp teeth like a shark. At that point, they both screamed and ran upstairs. Neither of them would go back to the basement without an adult for years. The only explanation she ever came up with was given to her by a minister, who said that when an entity or demon presents itself to a child, it will take the form of something the child can understand. What I have always been intrigued by is that both my mom and her friend have always told the same story. Very freaky. I live with my dad in the mountains, far from my neighbors. One day, me and my friend, C, were hiking and saw a slender, black, shadowy, humanoid figure. Me and him were spooked and walked all the way back to the cabin. We haven't really told anyone about it, so we didn't seem crazy. About 30 minutes ago, I was up, I couldn't go to sleep, and I went to throw something away. My room is between the front door and the kitchen, and right when I walked by the kitchen, I heard a single knock on the door. I almost shook my pants. I was scared. Now, about 10 minutes ago, I heard a slightly distant, creepy laugh. I have never seen anything paranormal or heard anything. I have no idea how these connect or if they do, but somebody please tell me what this could mean. When I was a kid, I went to a sleepaway Bible camp for a week. I went 2 times in different summers, but this took place my first year, in 2007 or 2008. The background about me is that I have always had supernatural events happen to me since I was a young toddler, such as tapping on the window of my room at night on the second story with no tree near. Anyway, this camp had different cabin groups, and my group's cabin was further away from the rest of the cabins. We get to our cabins, and the girls and boys split into 2 different cabins to set up our beds. Once done, we sit around our fire pit, listening to the rules. The rules that kind of stuck out the most to me are, 1. Ignore the sounds in the woods at night, even if it sounds like a person walking, and 2. Don't go to the restroom without another person at night. 3. Don't walk into the woods while it's dark out, even if you see a human shadow. There were other rules, but those are the ones that stuck out as odd. Anyway, the first night comes, and I'm trying to sleep with my flashlight inside my sleeping bag. I hear rustling by the window behind me, but I don't look since I'm used to sounds by my windows at home. I hear more footsteps, sounding like more than one person. The next day, we told the boys that their jokes weren't funny, but they didn't know a thing. That day, we got our last camp member in our group. Let's skip to that night when she needed to use the restroom and I was the only one up. We go, and while she was in the porta potty, I saw what looked like someone running by far in the woods. I made the dumb mistake like anyone in horror movies and started to walk towards it, but my cabin mate came out to stop me in time. The next night was when we had to camp out in the field by our cabins under the stars. We all slept for a few hours when I finally woke up. I looked around, and it looked like all my group's sleeping bags were empty. Looking towards the tree line, I see a dark shadow-like figure standing, but the legs look like they were a weird upside-down V and hunched over. It just looked at us for hours until it was nearly dawn. That was halfway through the week, and nothing else happened. Anyway, when I went back the next year, I heard the cabins my group used the year before were off limits. I still don't know what it was, and I didn't really see it again after the campout. This is not my only supernatural story, but this has kind of creeped me out the most. In 2007, I was driving on a rural highway, probably at 9:30 p.m. It was pretty dark out, and mine was the only car within sight. I saw something faint and blew up ahead, thinking it was the light of a police cruiser. As I got closer, it appeared to be just a small blue ball of light hovering in a field. It was moving in a very strange, almost organic manner, like a jellyfish. As soon as I started to get a good look at it, it darted along the field and went straight up in the air, poof, gone in a fraction of a second. I shared the story with a few people, who all called me crazy. I started to believe them, until I was driving home from work and saw that the ground was scorched where the event happened. A friend of mine who lives out in Wyoming said he sees weird things like that all the time. He sent me some videos he took of orbs. Sure enough, exact same thing. I have experienced a lot of unexplainable things, but the most by far happened a few years ago. I was sitting on my couch knitting, and behind me was a desk and desk chair. I felt and heard someone running behind me. I turned quickly, thinking it was my kid, but nothing was there, and the desk chair was slightly spinning. I kind of had a moment and looked throughout the house, and everything was fine. I pushed it out of my mind, and I continued to knit. Then, from the corner of my eyes, I see this figure staring at me, peering from the side of my couch. I look, and I see it disappear. It was a little blonde boy with bright, almost glowing blue eyes, a greenish, blue-gray face, and a dark purple smile. First, I'm not a supernatural kind of guy. That said, I was picking up my daughter from a friend's bat mitzvah near Lake Ontario, in Toronto. I was early, and it was a clear night, so I walked towards the water's edge to more clearly see the stars. I'm into astronomy. The water was smooth as glass, and I noticed a light shadow, reflection, from a star on the water. It was only about 15 degrees up in the sky and almost due south. I checked later, it was not serious. It was amazingly bright, like brighter than the space station, if you've seen that, pretty bright. Anyway, I'm standing about 20 from the water's edge, perplexed as to what the heck this could be when I saw a white coyote or wolf walking along the beach. I made a bit of noise so as not to frighten it. It didn't look at me but walked slowly along the beach. Now bear in mind that this is downtown Toronto, not exactly wolf territory. Anyway, I look up after the wolf leaves and watch as my very bright star slowly dims on a cloudless night and goes out. I looked at my watch. It was just after midnight. The next morning, I received a call that my best friend had died in his sleep. Later, it was determined that the time of death was just after 6 a.m. Oslo time, which was just after midnight my time. I'm not sure if it was the wolf or the bright star, but I know in my heart that my friend was saying goodbye. I went to a children's cemetery a few years ago with a bunch of buddies. It was a cooler, clear fall night when we got there, and as we stood watching, we saw what looked like clouds walking between the headstones. There were no real defined shapes, but they looked like they were walking and roughly person-shaped. We, all 7 of us, heard a little girl giggling and what sounded like a rope creaking from weight being dropped on it. All of the clouds were around the big oak tree in the middle of it, and it looked like one was hanging off a branch. We knocked out of there. On our way out, I saw 4 glowing red eyes in the back seat of my truck. Nothing in the truck was red or orange, and as I was driving, I could feel someone running with their hands on my face. Fingers under my jaw, back to my ears. My night got a lot weirder after that. I didn't sleep for 2 days following, and I still get nightmares from it. When I was little, I used to stay over at my grandmother's all the time. She would make me a pallet out of blankets on her living room floor, and she would always sit with me and rub my back until I fell asleep. Once, when I was 5 or 6, I woke up in the living room alone. Now, this was an old and isolated farmhouse, cornfields and no other houses surrounded her, so it was very dark. I had a moment where I forgot where I was. I remember I was lying on my back, and I sort of propped myself up with my arms, looking ahead of me toward her big TV cabinet, but I couldn't see much. I then roll over onto my belly to look behind me, in a sort of propped up seal position. As soon as I turned over, I was looking straight at a little girl who was standing at the head of my pallet, looking down at me. She was a bit older looking than me, with dark, curly hair, and she was wearing an old-fashioned dress, but not one that went to the floor. It sort of stopped at her ankles. The weirdest thing was that I wasn't afraid of her. I was confused and a little timid, but mostly curious. She had a soft, bluish-white glow around her. I wouldn't call it a light because it didn't really shine out, it just encased her, for lack of a better word. She was just looking at me, and she also had a sort of curious or intrigued look on her face. I don't know how long we stared at one another, not a very long time, for sure, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I very slowly and softly reached out my hand to touch her. Before my hand could get close to her, she dissipated. She did not disappear, it was more like watching water turn into a steam cloud, but this cloud was made of tiny little spheres or particles the same shade of bluish white that encased her, and moving as a unit, the cloud of spheres moved to the window, floating, and went through the glass and out of my line of sight. Seeing that triggered my fear response, and I literally screamed, "Grandma." She rushed in quickly and tried comforting me by saying it was a dream. It absolutely was not a dream. I was too awake and aware, and it couldn't be sleep paralysis because I moved too much. When I was several years older, Grandma confided in me that she knew the house to be haunted. She said she would see a tall shadow pacing the hall, the doors would rattle or shake when nobody was home but her. Alone in the house, she'd hear footsteps and voices in my grandpa's old study, and a little dark-haired girl would run by the windows in her living room. Creepy stuff, man. In my early 20s, I took a personal day off from my night shift job. I just needed a break and to get outside for a while. I drove about 15 miles from home to a church that is one of those stone labyrinth walking/contemplation circles. When I made it to the middle of the labyrinth, there was a tremendous snarling sound from the tree line about 150 feet away, which was followed by what sounded like a horse screaming in fear or pain. The horse sound stopped abruptly, there was a thud, and then there was complete silence. I stood there frozen, not moving, thinking there must be a bear or a wolf or something, both unlikely, as this was in the suburbs of Chicago, listening as intently as I could. Nothing. A minute passed. More nothing. I start thinking, okay, it must have been a spooked animal that ran off. There is nothing to worry about. Come on, adrenaline, calm yourself down. I took one step to start back down the path out of the contemplation circle. Behind me, a crashing sound, breaking branches, then the thumping of heavy footfalls on the ground, came straight towards me. Something huge and near impossible to describe other than dark and hairy covered the 150 feet between me and the tree line in just a couple seconds. Whatever it was barely brushed against the side of me, knocked me down, sent me rolling about 5 feet from where I was, and raced around the side of the church. Just like that, it was over. No more sound. No footfalls. No animal screams. No breaking branches. Just me, alone and terrified in the dark. Once I recovered, I didn't bother walking the path out. I sprinted across the stone lines and broke for my car, got in, and drove off to a well-lit Walmart parking lot. I only realized after I parked that I never even took the time to turn my headlights on. My unexplainables. Once out past McCamey, 110 around this time of year suddenly turned icy cold, and it honestly sounded like people talking on the wind. The workover rig hands were scared as duck. We sat in the logging unit, and the air outside just reeked of a floral perfume smell. It wasn't anything well-related. The primo said it was the smell of demons. Just a really weird atmosphere and afternoon. My other is driving down Boot Road outside Jaw the day before Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, maybe 5 to 6 p.m. The biggest dog I've ever seen just pacing about, then ran alongside our truck. It was easily the size of a black bear, but it was definitely a dog. Not a wolf or coyote. Just super tall. My Mexican brother or coworker kept telling me not to look at it and never talk about it. I went to an old farm-style graveyard or church at night with some friends. Some of the headstones were supposed to have some kind of gem or stone that reflected. Was well known in the area, but I had never been there. We went at night in my truck. Was so dark, you could hardly see. My one friend told me where to go, and we quickly came around a turn, and the church/gravestones were all of a sudden in front of us. I stopped the truck, and within seconds, the truck turned off as if someone had cut the power supply. No interior lights, no ignition switch, radio, etc. My buddies started freaking out, and me turning the key or trying the lights didn't do anything. It maybe lasted a minute, then all of a sudden everything in the truck turned on. Dash lights. Exterior lights, radio. When the truck turned back on, I was looking at the cluster and then looked up. A huge black bird, whose wingspan was close to the width of the truck, came out of nowhere and straight at my windshield. It let out a loud noise, maybe a caw as it flew right up over my windshield. Once it passed, you could see the church and reflective tombstone gems. Scared the living duck out of us. Started the truck and took off home. Never forget that. Definitely had a someone is there with us vibe when the truck died and shut off. I have been thinking about this encounter for over 20 years now, and I still can't make sense of it, so I figured I would share. Approximate date and location, 1997-1998, in the Appalachian region of the Carolinas in the southeast United States. I was a kid, probably in first grade or maybe second grade. I was sitting on the couch in our old trailer with my backpack on. It was double wide, so I could look across the wall, opening to the dining room, from the couch and the living room very easily. It was a small space, so this wasn't far away at all. As I'm sitting there waiting for my mom to finish drying her hair, she had huge fluffy hair because it was the 90s lol, I look up, and directly in front of me, standing, floating, behind the dining room table is this solid black man. I look at him, and he turns to look at me. We make eye contact, if you can call it that, because his eyes are just like two burning red holes. When he makes eye contact with me, it feels like time stops, and I feel the most complete terror I have ever felt, even to this day, and frankly, I've been through a statistically improbable number of really terrifying things. Nothing compares to that feeling at all. I was completely frozen and terrified. And after what feels like an eternity within a moment, he just turns and kind of floats out the end of the trailer. As soon as it ends and he's gone, I immediately jump up and run screaming to my mother. I tell her what just happened, and she tells me that it's okay, that was just my grandpa, and I insist to her that he absolutely was not my grandpa. We're from Appalachia, so ghosts and things like that are well accepted as real, although it is definitely also understood that sometimes people make shit up for the sake of a tall tale. So yes, ghosts are real, but you have to look at them with an attitude of discernment. Anyway, I still can't make sense of it at all. About a decade ago, in my early 20s, I found a story online about shadow men, with hats? And that really shook me up because it was the first time I had encountered somebody talking about anything similar to what I experienced. But I haven't ever seen any accounts of this specific dude. The sheer terror I felt, completely consumed by fear, gives me an indication that whatever this thing was, it was not kind or good. Does anyone have any similar experiences? I love to fish in a river very near where I live. Tonight was one of the nights where I went out and fished. The place I like to go is set behind a very old cemetery, and you have to cross through the cemetery to access the river. Tonight I walked down to the river and started fishing. I soon lost track of time and realized the sun was going down. I planned on cutting through the woods to get to my car before it was too dark. This, however, would involve walking through the middle of the old creepy cemetery in the near dark. Being comfortable with the area and having done this many times, I started to cut through the cemetery, and I started to hear a high-pitched yet quiet voice that was giggling and whispering in the woods. I thought it was just another family or person wandering back to the main road. After a bit, however, I realized it was only one voice, a voice that appeared to be very young, like an adolescent female child. I got very startled and freaked out. I ran back to my car and got my fishing gear situated in it. I was still hearing a quiet voice in the distance. Keep in mind that it's a wooded, secluded area in the dark. The experience ended when I drove away. I saw nothing, however, the noise of a voice and creepy laughter was prolonged and actually scary. This isn't the scariest thing that's happened in the woods for many, however, I believe this may have been my first run-in with a paranormal entity. Please comment if you have any ideas or speculations to explain this experience. A few months ago, I was sleeping cozily in my room when I woke up at around 2 to 3 in the morning to use the restroom. Naturally, I go to do that, however, once I get to the door frame, I get an overwhelming, unbearable sense to look up. Once I do, there is this awful creature staring back at me. Its head looks like a large blob made up of a mash of several facial features, looking just over the top of the door with its hand on the top edge of the door. The exact second that I lock eyes with this terrifying thing, I get a completely unbearable, absolutely heavy feeling to book it out there. Oddly enough, I didn't, rather, I stood and watched it. A few seconds later, the creature seemed to just fade away. I tell my parents about a week later, and they just say, it's just the light, even though the angles of the lights in my bedroom physically could not touch the bedroom, nor could they be moved unless completely relocated. There were consistent supernatural events in that bathroom for a while afterwards, random water turning on, a shower turning on with no one in there, and lights turning off randomly while people were in or not in the shower. It happened to me while I was in the shower, but the rest of the time no one was. I attempted to force the alleged spirit at the time out of the bathroom with a cross, as me and my family are highly Christian. However, someone found out, and my family has been giving me trouble every now and then about it. I have no idea if it's a spirit or a humanoid, or if it's even real, and I'm just crazy, so I figure this is the best place. If anyone has any idea what this is, I beg you to share. If anyone has a similar experience with a creature of the same build, please also share. After a couple of days, the events seemed to have only gotten worse. On the way home from Home Goods, my mom spotted a creature crossing the road from our house. It looked like a human, but it was lacking in hair and facial features, and its entire bottom half was missing as it seemed to be crawling using its 2 arms. I've also been experiencing a feeling of being watched at night, consistent random cuts or scratch marks, unexplained whispers, and the bathroom has been having the exact same things happening as mentioned, lights flickering at random, turning off but never back on, showering with no one there, the usual just a lot more often. The weirdest supernatural encounter I had was with the little boy in my kitchen sink. I was around 8 years old, and my room was originally a den, so it was a big open space, kind of in the middle of the double-wide mobile home we lived in. This room was next to the kitchen, and where my bed lay, I could clearly see my kitchen sink and counter space. Most nights, my mom would leave the light above the sink on because I was afraid of the dark. One night I woke up in the middle of the night, and when I rolled over in my bed, I saw a pale boy in what looked like raggy, oversized clothes and wet from head to toe, sitting on my kitchen sink. He looked like he was screaming at me, but I couldn't hear him. I could see him as clearly as day. I was terrified because I had no idea who the heck this kid was, and I still have no idea why I couldn't hear him. I cried staring at this kid until I exhausted myself and went to sleep. I couldn't get out of bed because I was too afraid he would come for me. This actually happened several nights in a row, and it always ended with me crying myself to sleep and hiding under my blanket. I finally came to my mom and told her what I was seeing and how scary it really was to me, and she told me to just ask him what he wants or tell him I don't know how to help him. I was a little terrified to try this, but when I woke up that night to go to the bathroom, he was there as usual, and it was the same silent scream and terrifying face on this kid. I gathered my nerves and yelled at him, "I don't know what you want. Please go away, you are scaring me." He closed his mouth and watched me for a little while, still sitting on my sink. I also just sat there and watched him until I couldn't stay awake anymore. I finally fell asleep. I woke up the next morning feeling much better. I never saw that kid again, and we never did look into why he might have been there. When I was younger, 7 to 8, I often had trouble getting to sleep due to my then extreme fear of the dark. I would often stay up for hours, hiding underneath my blankets, until I passed out from tiredness. On a couple of those nights, I saw some things that I'll never forget. These occurrences happened within a week of each other at my mom and dad's house. They were separated. The first one happened at my mom's house. I was staring at the ceiling at around midnight when I decided to lay on my side to hopefully fall asleep sooner. That was when I came face to face with a tall, 7-foot, humanoid figure sitting on the chair next to my bed. It was completely black, with no discernible features except for a large head. Terrified and thinking I was dreaming, I closed my eyes and rolled over to the other side, in the hope that I would wake up. When I opened my eyes again and turned around, the figure was still there. Panicking, I hid under my covers until I passed out. When I woke up, the figure was gone. The second incident happened at my dad's house. I had a nightlight in my room there, and it illuminated the wall next to my bed. I was just nodding off to sleep that night when, out of nowhere, I saw 3 otherworldly figures appear in front of the wall. They varied in height, from relatively short to very tall, with at least one having horns and another having long ears. All had greenish skin. This time, I screamed. As I was screaming, the figures remained, appearing to smile at me. It wasn't until my dad barged into the room after hearing me scream that they disappeared. To this day, I have no idea what those were, why they were there, or why those incidents came within a week of each other. Okay, so this happened last night. It was me and my coworker. We had an after-work event at Topgolf. It was a great time, and my coworker knew he'd be drinking a lot, so he got his dad to drop him off, and I volunteered to give him a ride home. As we're driving through his neighborhood, I comment on how nice it is and am in visible awe at the houses. He's like, "Yeah, it's a nice neighborhood, but get this, there's a really haunted house here." My ears instantly perk up. I've always been interested in the supernatural and have never experienced anything paranormal, so I thought it would be pretty cool to see this house. Anyway, we get to it and are standing in the stone path that leads to the front door, about 60 from the actual house. I'm scanning the house up and down, taking it all in, when suddenly my friend, very seriously, goes, "Yo, do you see that?" and is pointing at one of the windows on the first floor. I follow his finger and spot the window he's looking at. I look through the window into the dark room, and standing in the back corner of the room is what I can only describe as a black, cloaked figure. Again, the room was dark, and it was about 9 p.m., yet I could distinctly see a black silhouette within the darkness. I confirm that I see it as well, and we are both just standing there frozen, trying to see and figure out what it is. The creepiest part to me was that although I couldn't make out a face or any feature, I could tell it was looking straight at us, just as we were looking and pointing straight at it. We look at it for a solid minute, and it doesn't move, so we both decide, alright, let's go. We've seen enough. Immediately, and I mean the split second after our minds were made to go and our bodies turned to leave, the light in that room turned on. We notice out of our peripherals that the light has turned on and, of course, are curious about it. We look back, and in that same spot, there is now nothing. We're looking at just the corner where 2 walls meet. After this, we both ran back to my car, terrified, and I stayed up late thinking about it. That was my first paranormal experience. By the way, the house is called Myrtle Plantation and has a really interesting history. There are 11 documented spirits that reside in the home, but we're not sure if what we saw was a spirit. My brother and I saw the same figure. When we were about 7, we're twins, my brother and I used to sit in our shared room and do whatever it was 7-year-olds do after a school day. One night, we were both on the bottom of our bunk bed, taking turns playing on my Game Boy. The door to our room was open, and from the angle we were laying, you could see the living room and kitchen of the apartment, which were connected. For some reason, both of us decided to turn our attention away from the game and look out the door at the exact same time, and we both saw what looked like a dark shadow, in the shape of a man, running across from the left side of the door to the right. The weird thing is that about a foot or two after our door, where the figure was running, there was just a wall. I remember us thinking and talking about whether the person was hiding just over the side of the door frame. We called for our mother, told her the story, and asked her if somebody else was here or if it was her. She was obviously freaked out and said no, and when asked if she saw it too, her room was just next to ours and her door was open as well. She said she didn't. As we were already terrified of sleeping in the dark, all the lights were on in our house already, so there's no mistaking what we saw. We also didn't hear anything, we just saw it, which makes the experience even stranger. Nothing else supernatural happened in that apartment to us, and it's been about 12 years since that happened, and I still think about it from time to time. Honestly, if it weren't for my brother being right there next to me and seeing it too, I might have written it off as a vivid dream. But I can remember the experience so clearly, and he does too. I honestly have no explanation for what we saw. This story has taken over the whole span of my life up until now. I'm a 17-year-old female who spends most of her time at home, which leaves me home alone sometimes. I believe that my house is haunted or that I'm just crazy. My first memory of the supernatural was when I was about 6 or 7. I was waking up and the sun was just coming out when I saw a woman leaning over me, smiling with the most crooked smile. I still remember the feeling, and it still sends chills down my spine. It felt like slow motion as my eyes widened. I felt paralyzed under her stare. I wanted to cry out for my parents, but all I could do was wait until she disappeared. Another instance was when I was home alone. I was playing video games in the living room, chilling with my dog, when he suddenly came up to me and would not leave my side. He seemed to stare at something I could not see. His hair was puffed up, and he had a snarl going on. My dog usually never gets like that, he is a well-behaved dog, so when he did this, I freaked out and left the house with my dog. This happened in Western Germany, and what I'm about to share is the genuine truth. It all started with a horrible animal screaming sound outside my house at night, which I already compared to all wildlife animal sound records from zoology institutes, but nothing comes close to it. It kind of sounded like a woman screaming in agony, but then again, it was even worse. It felt like I could feel the vibration in my veins. It's hard to describe. It was really scary. I live in a tiny house next to forests and mountains. It was a dark October night, and I lay in my bed, which is in a sleeping corner. Right in front is a window, which is always half open, and above me is just a flat roof. Garden all around the house. At first, I heard one animal or creature scream. Then there seemed to be 2 of them. They sounded very close and wouldn't stop screaming for minutes. The next thing I heard was something heavy running through the garden under my bedroom window. Followed by heavy branches breaking at the height of my level, 2nd floor. I also heard a loud rush of air/wind combined with that. In the next second, this animal or creature jumped on my roof, so in that moment, it was right above me, ca. 2 to 3 meters. And that was the moment when things started to get messy and very confusing to me, until this day. First, I want to point out that this animal or creature sounded so heavy when it landed. I don't know any animal species that big around here. It sounded massive and, therefore, surreal. Also, the quickness of its movement seemed surreal. After that jump, it started to run on my roof. From one side to the other. It first sounded like it was something extremely heavy, on 2 legs. But that suddenly changed to what sounded like something extremely heavy, on 4 paws. I remember sitting straight up in bed, right under it, with an intense pulse, and my mind just trying to process what I'm hearing. What kind of creature is that? That was also the turning point, when I seriously felt threatened. Since I'm a girl living alone in a tiny house and didn't really have any protection to fight something massive like this off, just knives or pepper spray, which sure would have been useless, I decided to do something stupid, I guess. I thought maybe I could shock it or scare it away, so I hit against my bed window with my flat hand, as hard and loud as I could. What happened next messes with me until today. Not even 1 second passed after I hit the glass when this creature hit it right back from outside. So, It must have been sitting right above me in that moment and reached down to my window. And it reacted so quickly that it was surreal. The sound of what touched my window glass sounded like a mix between big claws and feathers. This reaction and the way it sounded put me in a kind of shock, I guess. I realized I'm quite screwed in that moment. Because whatever it was very intelligent, huge, and wouldn't back off. That's how it felt to me, as if it were to say, "You have no power here. I am always one step further. Know your lane." Basically, I just froze then. On my bed, my back was against the wall, and all I could do was stare at where it hit the window glass. I was too scared to close it. I was too scared to breathe. Then it suddenly just left my roof, which sounded again like a massive weight would jump off in the air. I never shared this encounter before because I felt pretty alone with it. Until last night, when I went on the internet to look for someone from Germany who had experienced something similar. I was lucky. Big Bear Lake, California. The night of February 27th, early in the morning, I was staying at the Best Western in Big Bear. At approximately 12:35 a.m., I walked to my car alone to retrieve my luggage. It had been snowing and was extremely dark. My car was facing a country road. When I hit the unlock button on my car, the parking and interior lights came on. This allowed me to see two eyes reflecting in the middle of the road, about 10 to 15 feet from me. At first, I thought it was a deer. I have lived in Colorado, and I'm accustomed to seeing wildlife. I instantly stopped and remained still, as I didn't want to scare off what I thought was a deer. As my eyes glanced downward, I noticed it wasn't a deer. It looked like a white, hairless, naked man on all fours. It was at least 4 feet in height, on all fours. Probably around 15 feet if it stood up. There was a brief moment as our eyes made contact. It then, as quickly as I have ever seen any animal, turned around, ran as fast as a cheetah away from me, and then went straight up a tree. I was frozen in disbelief. I said out loud to myself, "You have to be flipping kidding me." Just as I was going to convince myself that this couldn't possibly be happening, it leapt from treetop to treetop, and I could see its full outline as it did so. I've never heard of such a creature, but I have found some other videos and pictures online that look exactly like what I saw. The speed and strength it had are like nothing I've ever heard of before. The creature was definitely solid. It appeared as if it was coming toward me, possibly hunting me. I don't know what stopped it. Was it the lights that went on? It had no visible genitalia. It had very human-like qualities. First, it was a new moon, and I believe it was an eclipse that day as well. There was a creek across the street. I don't know if this has anything to do with my experience, but I was also a day from menstruating. If this had been a huge-eyed gray alien, it would have made more sense. I've heard of those, but this was unlike anything I've ever been familiar with. None of this makes sense to me, considering the speed and agility of the creature, and there shouldn't be any way that the treetops should have been able to hold the weight of the creature. It appeared to be flashing like a TV going in and out of reception as it sprinted up the tree. It also didn't appear to disrupt the foliage as it did so. I immediately called my father after I rushed back into my hotel room. My son was asleep, and I was understandably in a state of shock. At this time, no one knew what hotel I was staying in. As I was crying on the phone to my father, the hotel phone rang. I answered it, and it was only dial tone. Then, there was a knock at the hotel room door. Once again, no one was there. At this point, my son woke up due to the commotion. I told him it was a scary dream. I gave my father the hotel information, and he advised me to go wait in the lobby with my son. As we were leaving, there was another knock, but it was at the back sliding glass door that went out to a privately fenced-in patio. This was a one-time encounter, and it's unfortunate that I still live in fear of this experience. I was raised Christian. This humanoid doesn't fit into any category in which I am familiar. I don't know why this happened or what I'm supposed to learn from it. In addition, the hotel phone number, I found out later, has 6 sixes in a row. I don't know if that has anything to do with what happened. I was always taught that demons can't have a physical body unless they're possessing someone. I can't imagine it flying a spacecraft due to its primal nature. Is it a transdimensional being? Nephilim? What was it going to do? Is it going to come after me again? Why didn't it do what it was set out to do? My previous beliefs about the world and the way things work have been tossed upside down. While it's thought-provoking, it's been very traumatic and has put me in a panic state that's distracting and mostly negative. At my mom's house, she has a room dedicated for my nephews when they come over that is full of stuffed animals and toys. It used to belong to my sisters when they were young, and their stuffed animals are in there. There is one stuffed animal, which is a black cat, that I have caught twice now, doing different things both times when I was walking towards the room and glanced inside. The first time tripped me out the most, as I walked toward the room and looked at the cat, and on it, I saw a black German Shepherd type dog head looking towards the window, then changed back when I walked in. I asked, "What are you?" And my mother was right behind me, but she dismisses everything since she doesn't really believe in anything supernatural. The second time a few days later, same circumstances, but I caught it looking straight up at the ceiling, then it straightened its head forward to its normal position. I took it out to the living room and asked my nephew if he liked it, to see if it might have moved while he's by himself. He likes it, and I don't feel any bad energy coming from it, so I left it there. It's just weird to see these things happen in that room. So when I was still living with my parents when I was younger, I slept in the living room. We didn't have a big apartment, so they had one bedroom. I didn't mind, the living room had a big television, and the pull-out couch was comfy enough. So one night I'm lying down watching some adults swim when I begin to drift off. I turned my body over to get more comfortable, but I had this feeling like I didn't want my back facing the dining room and kitchen area. At this point, the TV is the only light in the apartment, and it was big enough that it provided some light into the kitchen and dining area. Well, when I turned to face the dining area at this point, after that uncomfortable feeling, I saw something that made my heart drop. I saw what appeared to be a figure standing just outside the entrance to the kitchen, next to the dining room table. Now in that apartment, there's a tiny step to step up into the dining area, and after I rubbed my eyes to make sure I was truly seeing what I was seeing, the shadow figure took a step down the tiny step from the dining area. I never moved so fast in my life, and I jumped out of bed and flipped the light on next to the pull-out couch as fast as humanly possible. The figure was about 5 feet 10 inches minus 6 feet tall and totally featureless. Just shadow looking. With the light in the living room now illuminating most of the apartment, I kept my eyes locked on the dining area. I didn't move from my spot the rest of the night, and frankly, I was quite frozen with fear. My mom eventually woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and asked me what was wrong and what happened. She chalked it up to a really bad nightmare, but I knew what I saw. I've only had one other confirmed encounter with this being, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think it is the same creature. The other confirmed sighting happened about 3 or 4 years later, when I was back visiting from college. I was playing video games late when something told me to look behind me. It just felt like there were eyes on me. Well, I turn around, and there it is. I yelled and flipped on the light again as fast as I could, and again it disappeared. The morning after this happened, I sat my parents down and we spoke about it. They claimed to have never seen this being, and they don't feel any oppressive force in the apartment, but they assured me they believed me and wanted me to feel safe there. These two encounters are not confirmed as beings, but I think they relate to it. I had an ex-girlfriend sleeping over, and I was watching TV while she played her Nintendo Switch. She claimed to me that something that sounded like a yell came from the kitchen area, and she was really freaked out. Mind you, I didn't hear this one because I had my video game headset on, but she was so freaked out that it didn't seem like she was lying. Finally, I was on the phone late one night with a friend from Atlanta, and we were just talking and catching up. I had fallen asleep on the phone at one point, and I woke up with my phone almost dead and a voicemail from my friend. She claimed that after I fell asleep, she heard a violent scream on the other end of the line and thought something bad had happened to me. I called her back, and thankfully she was still awake, and she told me something screamed that sounded terrifying, and it didn't sound anything like me. Mind you, this scream never woke me up, and the TV was not on. I was always on the fence about the supernatural and paranormal, but these events made me a true believer. When I was 16, my family and I moved to a small town near Mount Shasta. The house we moved into backed up to a canyon, which was essentially the foothills of national forests that encompass the majority of the wilderness of Northern California. At the time, I had no idea as to the mythological lore with which the region imbued. It didn't take too long for me to recognize that there was a strange energy to the place. The strangely mysterious and appetizing ambience was met with my insatiable curiosity about the unknown. Anyhow, on one ostensibly normal summer night, something strange happened. At that point in my life, I used to unjustifiably sleep with a TV and a fan on every night. Also, for the sake of setting the context, I always kept my door shut at night. Fast forward. I awoke abruptly in the middle of the night to a pitch-black room and complete silence, the TV off, the fan powered down, and my door wide open. Everything was completely silent. I peered out my window, which was adjacent to my bed, and noticed that the lights were turned down in the entire area. There was apparently a regional power outage. It was at this moment that the faintest bit of moonlight illuminated what appeared to be a 7-8 foot tall thing standing in my doorway. I was immobilized by its baffling presence. Quickly, after recognizing the sheer strangeness of this quick sequence of events, I arose to my feet and approached this thing, to the best of my ability. As I got closer, I could see that this figure had a large head, an unusually thin neck, and no noticeable facial features. It was as though my operating system, that is, my brain, couldn't calculate what it was that I was seeing. The shape of this thing's head and its height, as well as its lack of normal facial features, were such that I couldn't reduce it to human description. It was in a category of its own. As I finally got about 2 feet from it, it stretched its anomalously lengthy arms towards me. It began to sway, almost in a hypnotic manner. I vividly remember it panting heavily at me and moving its arms in jarring movements back and forth. Looking back on it, it reminds me of how a praying mantis makes hypnotic movements, something like that. The last thing I remember is that I was trying to yell out to one of my parents, but they couldn't hear me. The odd part of this is that both of my parents were light sleepers. It was as though my voice was muzzled somehow. Anyhow, as I was trying to yell out, I was also trying to push through this thing to get out of my room, to no avail. At last, I broke through what can only be described as resistance, the figure vanished, and I fell through the doorway. My mother rushed down the hall and asked me what had happened. I was speechless, dumbfounded, and unable to sleep for a couple of days. Not too long after that night, the level of high strangeness in my life began to accelerate rather quickly. Within the following decade, I had experienced dozens, if not hundreds, of UFO sightings, orb encounters, strange experiences in the woods with perhaps fae-like elements, and other seemingly invisible entities. I also began having fairly regular prophetic-like dreams. For whatever reason, it feels as though the experience with that humanoid in my doorway marked the start of a series of strange events that have followed me well into adulthood, almost as though it had an impact on my capacity to perceive certain things, as if my frequency or resonance was altered that night. Has anyone seen something like the figure I've described? I wish I could remember it more clearly. Its head was sort of like a rounded, elongated triangle, similar to the ET depiction, if I'm being honest. I can't recall any facial features, either because it was too dark or because I simply couldn't wrap my head around what it was I was seeing. I'm not sure. The panting, though, sticks out to me the most. Weird encounters at my supernatural village. My village is a freaking supernatural place with weird things happening over the years, and there was even a UFO crash. My village is Atalante, named after the Greek Amazon, and it was all over the news back in 1990 when the weird object landed. But let's get started. Story number 1. While my great-grandpa was young, he was working for someone who had sheep, and one night, one of the sheep went nuts. So during the night, while they were asleep, they heard some noises, and they woke up to find the sheep with a saddle on and walking. They tried to stop it, but it was like it didn't listen. None of the sheeps had ever done this before, so when the sheep turned around, it didn't really look like a sheep anymore but something else, like the voice was deeper, and it was like it walked on 2 legs. The face was distorted, and it was definitely not white anymore. My great-grandpa was so scared after this that he ran and never worked with this guy again. Story number 2. There are a lot of rumors about people using dark magic and evil things, and a guy my grandpa knew didn't believe these things were real. He kept walking around telling this to the locals at the cafes, and a weird old dude heard him, and he was like, "You'll see tonight," so he sent a weird freaking donkey to him that kept kicking him at night until he begged to stop, and he said he believed in demonic entities. Story number 3. Now this is a neighbor of my grandpa. While they were in their 20s, he was a man who went to church very often, always praying and always believing in God, and it was like the devil tricked him every day. There was a boy who kept calling him at night from the stairwell of his house. He asked him to go outside and play, and after a while, when he didn't join him, the boy turned into a black dog. That happened for a long time until they called a priest, and it stopped. Story number 4. This happened to one of my uncles. He came back from work late at night. They were working as farmers with clover. Anyway, there used to be a small and narrow street that led to the house faster, but no one went there at night. It was a crossroad, and there was a small faucet there too, but everyone avoided it after midnight. We'll say my uncle decided to head faster home rather than stay safe, and something invisible attacked him. It grabbed him by the neck and pushed him down. He immediately started saying a prayer, the Lord's Prayer, and the thing left was possibly a demon. A priest later told him never to use that street, and guess what? The street doesn't exist anymore. There's a deserted house there now, and I don't want to know what's hiding in there. Story number 5. My aunt used to hear a weird banging outside of their window every night when they moved into their new home. Like someone was chopping wood. They often went out to see if there was someone, but no one was there, and apparently they learned they had killed soldiers at that place during World War II. Story no. 6. The alien UFO crash. So during the 1990 summer, there were a lot of UFO sightings all around Greece, and one actually crashed on a hill next to my village. Story number 7. My cousin said at their clover field once something landed again. Because there was a circle and it was like burned, and for like 2 years nothing grew on that place again. Story number 8. When we went with my grandpa to buy cheese from a guy he knows, we walked into his farm. I looked around the walls, and they were full of lashes, like the whips that hit the horses, but some of them were a bit too much. They seemed super heavy, and I asked my grandpa, "What's that?" I was like 9 to 10, but I have never seen that type of lash before. It didn't look normal. Anyway, my grandpa told me to shush, and he said we'd talk at home. So when we went home, he told me that a man calls demons and hits them. He asks them who they hurt, and they hit them so hard with those whips. So I was like, oh, he's nice then, and my grandpa said immediately that he hasn't been in church for many years because what he's doing is against God. Even though he hits them, he still uses dark magic to call them. Well, guys, these are just my stories, and I have a lot more about ghosts and saints appearing at churches, and so many kids I know have their own stories from their grandparents. I swear, in my village and especially in central Greece, there's something there. Some people even claim to have seen satyrs at the ancient place of Delphi and that there are weird electromagnetic powers. And don't get me started about Mount Olympus. I had a supernatural encounter the other day at home that left me feeling spooked and wondering if anyone has had a similar experience. It was a typical lazy weekend morning. My girlfriend and I had stayed up late fixing my computer, and we ended up sleeping in. As I headed to the kitchen to grab a towel for a shower, I noticed that one of my parents' cars was gone and assumed that they had gone out for the day. We have 2 small dogs that I could see outside, but they had no way of getting inside unless someone let them in. As I was getting dressed after a shower in the bathroom, I heard my parents' bedroom door open forcefully and the sound of bare feet running on the tiles outside the bathroom. The footsteps ran to the dressing room, which is across from the bathroom door, and the door slammed shut. I assumed that my mother had slept in and was in a hurry to get dressed. I opened the dressing room door, expecting to see her at the dressing table, but the room was empty. I was shocked, and my next thought was that my girlfriend might have gotten up. I asked her if she had heard someone go into the dressing room, and she said yes. But when I told her that no one was there, she was equally surprised. We had a quick walk around the house, but there was no one there. The dogs were still outside, and it couldn't have been them. The windows were also all closed, as it's still quite cold here. About 10 minutes later, my parents arrived home from their swim, which they had done before we had even woken up. I told them what had happened, and they confirmed that it wasn't them. Just to clarify, we've felt an energy in the house before, but it has never made itself known like this. I'm still feeling spooked by the experience and wondering if anyone has any idea of what it could be. Have you had a similar encounter? Any thoughts or advice would be appreciated. Okay, so I need to give a little backstory first. I had this little necklace thing that had a small crystal type thing hanging from it. It had a little knob on top that, if you twisted, would turn on a blue light inside of it. The light flashes at about 3-second intervals or so. Well, me and a buddy were in my room asleep when we were like 14. I had that light hanging on my wall turned on, but my friend couldn't get to sleep with it on, and neither could I. You could see it through your eyelids the way you can faintly see light when your eyes are closed. Well, I got up and turned it off. This was just before midnight. Suddenly, an hour later, at exactly 1 a.m., the light came back on. It woke me and my friend up and creeped us out. We ignored it, and I turned it off again. Another hour passes. 2 a.m., and it's on again. Now it was really getting weird because neither of us was messing with it. So this time I took the batteries out of it and put them in my pocket. 3 a.m., and it's back on, and the batteries are gone from my pocket. It wakes us up for the 3rd time, and by now we were really freaked out. This time I took it off the wall, took the batteries out, and dropped the necklace behind my dresser. I then took the batteries and threw them under my bed. And now my bed had all kinds of shit under it. Tons of toys. And these batteries were those little, round watch battery type things. So they clinked and clunked under there. If anyone were to try to get them, they'd have to dig through the mess of metal parts under the bed in the pitch black darkness. However, without a single noise, the light was back on the wall, flashing. At 4 a.m. we couldn't get back to sleep. We turned it off and just sat there watching it for a couple of hours. By 6, the sun started coming up, and it hadn't moved. So I went outside and threw it into the woods. Thankfully, I never saw it again. It was so ducking weird, and to this day, my friend and I get weirded out just talking about it. A few years ago, I was drinking with a couple of buddies of mine. We were all drunk, it was late and dark, and we decided to go hang out at the World War II bunkers near where we were staying. It was a former military base at Fort Ward Park, Washington. It's probably no more than a quarter mile from the water. We're on an island, and we're in the Pacific Northwest, so there is naturally lots of dense forest everywhere. We were having a good time, and everything was fine. We even laid down for a few minutes and started talking about shooting stars, and I remember mentioning never seeing one ever. Literally, within 3 seconds afterwards, I saw one. Cool coincidence. There's a lot of graffiti on the cement walls, some of it very scary looking, even more so at night, throughout these bunkers, and it's obvious a lot of high schoolers have been there, vandalizing the place. These bunkers are made of cement. There is an entire roof that you can walk on top of, with stairs at various spots that lead to the bottom level. You could easily fall into the stairway hole from the opposite side, as well as jump off the roof onto the grass, which is just tall enough so that you would definitely injure yourself if you jumped. Now to the actual trippy part. And let me say first that I am the epitome of someone who insists on thinking logically and refuses to believe in things like ghosts. But this made me a bit open-minded about that. We walk down from the roof and decide to explore some of the dark rooms on the ground level. We go into one of them, and a bunch of bats begin to fly around. The first time I saw bats. We leave and proceed to the next room. It is too dark and scary, so we decide to exit. When we're outside, we see that there is a light coming from the roof. I immediately think they are from headlights, and perhaps someone called the cops on us. We were talking loudly, and there was a house about 100 meters away. We walk up the stairs, expecting the worst, and there is a small fire lit in the middle of bare cement. It was so freaking weird and scary. One of my buddies steps on it to put it out, then starts walking, isn't paying attention, and falls down the wrong end of a stairway. It is probably a solid 12-foot drop, and he wouldn't even be able to see where he's landing. I hear him scream, FCK. A few short moments later, I hear the weirdest sound I've ever heard in my life, a quiet scream, about 3 to 5 seconds long. It sounded like maybe from a woman, but not 100% human. It sounded like it was right next to me, yet it was really far away, across the water, at the same time. It didn't sound like a scream for help, from terror, or out of distress, but rather like it was trying to scare me and wanted me to go away. I know I was drunk, but I definitely heard it. My friend who fell luckily is one of the toughest guys I know. He's a wrestler, and even though he landed hard on his knee and was in definite pain, he was able to walk it off and had no long-term damage. My other buddy mentioned something about a Molotov cocktail, but I do not recall any glass. I think he only said this because that is the only possible logical explanation, even if he didn't see proof. He is an incredibly logical person, so I suspect he was right and someone was playing a prank. I know I was drunk, but I really don't recall. Has anyone experienced anything like this? I never saw anything and am not claiming to have experienced a spirit or ghost. But I did experience a fire that had no explanation for showing up in an odd scream, and it was even more frightening because I thought for a few moments that there was a spirit and it didn't want us there, and it was the reason why my friend fell. What the hell happened? I have had this experience locked away in my head for many years. Keeping it to myself and not sharing it because I just didn't give it any second thought. Chalking it up to a trick of the eye, sleep paralysis, something boring and explainable. While I am a hard skeptic, I do love the idea and hope of something else. Though I know it's easy for the brain to play tricks and fool us, I'm quick to doubt and turn to it's just a weird coincidence. My parents' house isn't old. My dad built the house in the 1980s on some cleared land. There is no history on the property. It was just a parcel of logging territory in the middle of the woods that the original owners parted with. Quite a few years ago, I was in middle school. Normal kid, normal life, had friends, played sport. Basketball was my favorite sport. Even went to summer camps in hopes of it eventually leading to scholarships. Often, I would have camped the first half of the day, then come home and take a nap after hours of running back and forth on the court. My bedroom was on the first floor. From the position of my bed, you could see straight down the hallway, into the kitchen, and to the front door. I always napped with the door open because, as my mother would say, you're not sleeping the day away. The noise of the kitchen was there but subtle, though still loud enough so I wouldn't unintentionally crash for 8 hours. I think it was a Friday. I know that day I was pretty drained. I had to do a 1v1 with a boy I knew from school. He was good. I wanted to be better. So I gave my defense all I had. I didn't beat him. But I felt I could keep up with him. Knowing I was neck and neck with one of the best players on the boys' varsity team was one of the highlights of my public school career. When I got home, I was proud. I once felt deserving of that pride. I don't even remember falling asleep. I just kept replaying the day in my head and drifted off to sleep at some point. I shot awake. I didn't move. My eyes stayed closed. But I was most certainly awake. I had no sense of how much time had passed. I could hear, but everything was muffled. A loud ringing blocks most noise out. I could hear my parents talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I lay on my back, my arms folded across myself, my fingers interlocked, perfectly still. Frozen. I started to fight to get my eyes open. It took everything I had. Finally, I got them cracked open. Just enough that I couldn't decipher much of my sight, but I could see shapes and colors. I could feel this glowing warmth over me. And in an instant, I had the control to open my eyes again. Within the same moments, my eyes pop open all the way, and the warmth moves from just above me and goes towards the head of my bed. Immediately behind it was a blue light. It was electrical. It felt like every inch of me was hit with static. The warm glow, followed by a tail of blue light, was like a shooting star that streamed across my body from belly to head. I remember telling my mom about it and seeing the shock and worry in her face, but I never thought to ask what her thoughts were. I've never had a repeat of this. I've never had sleep paralysis before or since this. To this day, I still find it bizarre. Okay, so this is something that happened to my mom and my sister when they went to the Myrtle Plantation 1 or 2 years ago. My mom and sister were staying in the dorm room. Supposedly, that is always supposed to move around when you sleep. My mom has been there a few times, but in different rooms. My mom and my sister went out into some kind of courtyard, if I remember correctly. They were going to see this house or building. There were rumors that if you went out at night and looked at the house windows, the curtains would move, sway, or close. So they were both out there watching, I'm assuming they were talking, when, out of nowhere, they heard this blood-curdling scream. They both ran back to their rooms. After a few minutes or so, they were standing in the hallway, and a few people popped out of the rooms. They asked if my sister and my mother had heard the scream too. They said they had, and if I remember correctly, there was a somewhat old couple staying there. My mother and sister said that they had left that night, seeming scared. My mother came back with some pictures on her phone. I think they were in some type of wooded area. And you can plainly see what looks like I'm the type of human ball of light sort of thing. Now my mother doesn't really think it was a ghost. She believes that it was a panther, seeing as people say that the sound a panther makes is a scream. My sister really doesn't think much of it either. She believes there was something out there, but she just can't put a finger on it. As for me, the Myrtle Plantation has a lot of history, and a lot of the stories have been passed down and changed over the course of its history. There are all kinds of rumors, like how you can see faces in mirrors. I for one believe it may have been something supernatural. But that's just my opinion. So I was 20 when I first saw the scariest thing ever. Being a Wiccan, I haven't come across many things that scared me. Yes, I'm terrified of the ocean, but I'm not afraid of anything paranormal. This time, it was different. I was staying with a friend of mine since my boyfriend and I had broken up recently because of some heated arguments. We will call my friend Sean. One night, Sean and I went outside to have a cigarette before bed. It was a beautiful sunset, and a little ways across the way, I saw this big black dog walk towards a house, but just before it got to the house, it looked at me, then turned back to the house, then vanished into thin air. I flicked my half-smoked cigarette and quickly walked back inside, grabbing Sean's arm and pulling him in, with me locking the door behind us. What was that about? Sean asked before noticing my paler than normal face. All I said was Hellhound. Skip ahead a few months when I was driving home from work with my then boyfriend, we will call him Shane. We got to the house right around sunset when, suddenly, sitting in the gravel parking lot across the street from the house, a big black dog with reddish-orange eyes stared at the truck. I gasped and ducked down my face, which was paler than normal. Shane looked at me, then into the rearview mirror, and his eyes got wide, realizing why I was terrified. He knew the story of my first sighting of this hellhound. He got out of the car to walk over to the dog. When he got back, he told me, as soon as I got to the center of the street, it disappeared. It just vanished into thin air. Since then, I have broken up with Shane, and I am now married to a much better guy. To this day, I have not seen it again. I went to the battlefield of Bull Run, Virginia, not too long ago and had an experience I can't explain. The battlefield saw combat twice during the American Civil War. I will state that I am a bit of a skeptic, but this experience was hard to rationalize. Even writing this makes my spine shudder. It was a dreary, rainy day, with a slight mist clinging to the ground. I had driven to the battlefield later in the day and was the only person on the grounds, except for the occasional park ranger walking around the perimeter of the visitor center. The sky was gray and growing darker. I was standing next to an old house at the top of a hill near the parking lot, which was not far from the visitor center. The hill gave a great view of the entire battlefield on clear days, but with the mist and increasing darkness, my visibility was limited to the wood line about 200 yards away. As I took in the panoramic view of the darkening battlefield, it began to grow colder. I chalked this up to the occasional chilling breeze blowing across the open field. As I pulled my jacket in tighter, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I heard a man whisper, "Get down." I whipped around, expecting to see a park ranger behind me, but there was nothing. I snapped back around and looked towards the visitor center, thinking maybe a ranger was yelling out to me to get off the hill because the grounds were closing, but I saw no one. I began to get nervous, desperately searching the horizon for any signs of life. "Who was that?" I called out. While my eyes strained in the dark, my main question was not who grabbed my shoulder, but what. As I frantically looked around, I began to notice that the mist on the ground began to dance gently as if someone or something was disturbing it, like an unseen man was walking away from me. The strange movements of the mist distracted me from my former nervousness, but I soon snapped back to reality when I heard an ungodly shriek inside the locked house. It was definitely the voice of a woman. It started loud and shrill but slowly tapered off into low, guttural gargling. I was rooted to the ground in shock, unable to even breathe, let alone scream. When the situation finally sank in, I booked it for the visitor center. I don't think I ever ran as fast as I did after hearing that ungodly wail. I startled the park ranger at the desk when I yanked open the door to the visitor center and slammed it shut, panting and babbling like an insane man. When I finally gained my composure, I told the ranger what had occurred, and he tried to give a convincing smile. He told me I must have been out in the damp and cold too long and invited me to check out the informational film, small museum, or gift shop. While I took him up on his offer to check out the gift shop, I couldn't get over the ranger's underlying fear. His smile was forced, and he appeared to be hiding something, but I understand he may not have wanted to say anything that might frighten future visitors, so I let the matter go for the time being. While I perused the gift shop, I heard the door to the visitor center close, and I watched the ranger move up the hill to the house, pointing a flashlight around, searching for God knows what. As I paid for my purchases, the cashier, an older woman, gave me both an affirmation and a warning. "Did you hear voices out there, sweetheart?" I nodded. "Well, those soldiers out there were just lonesome. You have no reason to fear if you treat them respectfully, but I wouldn't test them. Just because they are dead doesn't mean they can't hurt you." When I got home, I scoured the internet for any explanation for the terror I experienced, and I found that an old woman died in the house, killed by a cannon aimed at Confederate sharpshooters near the house. Was it the ghost of a Confederate sharpshooter that warned me to get down? Was it the old woman's tortured spirit that let loose that blood-curdling shriek? I may never know. But there is something supernatural out there on that battlefield, and in its mind, the war is not over. So about 2 weeks ago, my younger sister started hearing voices. I've always believed in the supernatural and paranormal, so naturally it came up in conversation this past Wednesday. It was her, myself, and a friend of hers on my family's back porch, telling each other scary stories that had happened to us. She told us about this voice she keeps hearing. It's deep and masculine, and it calls to her at night in her room, telling her to come outside. She says the voice does not yell, but it is loud enough to hear clearly from outside in the middle of our yard. Our property is about 1,200 square feet, and our house is a single story. Our driveway is short and made of gravel and extends all the way into our backyard, ending at the foot of our back deck steps. That'll be important later. Anyway, Thursday night, after we all got home from our daily activities, I thought I saw something moving in the small patch of trees in our backyard. Now my dad doesn't live at home, and my mother just left again to go tanning. I was the only adult home to supervise my 2 sisters and their friend. So when I saw the movement, I went into my sister's room and told them to stay in the house until I came back inside. Being teenagers, they of course ignored me and went straight to my back deck. They all went inside after I didn't find anything back there, but just as they got in the house, something threw me through the air a good 5 feet. I'm 5'10" and 180 pounds, so being thrown through the air is not something I've experienced as an adult. Well, I of course lost my mind and ran into the house, losing a shoe in the process. About 10 minutes went by, and I realized I would need my shoe for work the next day. I leashed my 102-pound pit bull and went to retrieve my shoe. I'm not afraid to admit that I was terrified of going back out there alone. When I reached the back deck, however, my pitty refused to follow me into the backyard any further. He sat and held his leash in his mouth, which he does when he wants us to know he'll stay without being told. His ears were back, and although he wouldn't come with me, his eyes followed me the whole time. He knew we were both in danger. I grabbed my shoe, told him to come as I sprinted back into the house, and he beat me to the front door. I got back inside, and my sister's friend, we'll call her Brandy, told me she saw me get thrown. She said she ran to get my sisters when it happened, but only my sister, who heard the voice, believed me. I asked her to look at my back, as I thought I'd cut it in the fall, and she screamed and ran off. I immediately went to the bathroom to look, and I had 4 very long scratch marks running down the length of my back. At this point, 3 of us are freaking out, and we all need a smoke break, cigarettes and vaping. We weren't using drugs, and to go out to the front porch. My youngest sister, the non-believer, goes in the house to get her lighter, and 2 seconds later she is back out the door, yelling that there was something looking into our back window. Our front door leads into a small hallway, and directly across the full length of the house is an unobscured view of said window, which slides open and has no blinds or curtains. The only problem is that, in order for her to see the head and shoulders of someone or something looking into that window, they would have to be over 7 feet tall. Now we're all freaking out, and we decide to stick together since it only seems to appear to one person at a time. We stayed on the front porch, and eventually I said, "So we're just going to sit out here with this thing all night?" Immediately after I say this, we hear immensely heavy footsteps running towards the front yard from the side of our house with the driveway extension. We all hauled asses in the house because gravel was flying and we saw literally nothing but could hear it running straight for us. My mother got home and blessed the area I was attacked in with sage, and she also blessed my sister's physical body and spirit in accordance with her native heritage. I am scared out of my mind because even though this thing doesn't appear to be able to get in the house, most likely due to the blessing my mother gave after things started moving on their own, it can get us outside. I do not own a car, so I have to walk home from work late at night, which means this thing has plenty of time to attack me again. Same situation with my sister. If anyone has any experience in this area, please help us. My grandparents' story. True story, I swear. It was the middle of the night when my grandfather heard a baby crying in his house. This was not unusual, because my aunt, his daughter, had just given birth and was living with them. He attempted to go back to sleep, but the baby just kept on crying. Wondering why his daughter hadn't tended to her son in the next room, he goes to check on both of them. But once he enters the room, he realizes the crying he hears isn't coming from his daughter's room but from the kitchen. She must be in the kitchen, he thinks to himself. But as he makes his way there, he sees that no one is in there, but that he still hears a baby crying from within. Not knowing what's going on, he goes back to his daughter's room, sees that both she and his grandson are asleep, then goes back to his room to wake up my grandmother. He explains to her what's happening, but she thinks he must either be crazy or sleepwalking. Together, they again check their daughter's room, but they still hear a baby's crying coming from the kitchen. As they approach the kitchen, the crying becomes louder and louder. Upon entering the kitchen, they turn on the lights but see that no one is there. That's when they realize the crying was coming from the stove area. They approach the stove, but realize that it's actually coming from within the stove. That's when they open the oven. They hear a baby crying from inside the oven but see no baby. 3 years ago, I relocated to the desert southwest to work at a wilderness therapy program for at-risk youth. Quite a few field staff have supernatural stories involving skinwalkers. From my knowledge, skinwalkers are unique to Native American mythology. A skinwalker is typically a Native American who has the ability to take on the shape of an animal, most commonly a coyote. That is about all I can say, as I'm not a Native American or intimately familiar with it through first-hand experience. The field we worked in has a historical Native American presence, from pictographs and petroglyphs to burial sites. Due to various events, certain locations in the field became off-limits to camping for our student groups, specifically, camping near burial sites. Also, I'm writing a bunch of these from memory, and it has been a while since I heard them first-hand or second-hand. Laughing coyotes. A long-term field staffer turned staff director heard human laughter over some boulders on top of a hill. He investigates to find a group of coyotes sitting in a circle facing each other, laughing. Running man. Another long-term staffer is driving out of the field on a major dirt road by himself. He notices a lone coyote running alongside his vehicle. He speeds up, and the next time he looks back, a naked Native American is running alongside his vehicle. The man is running through the brush while looking straight at the staff. The staff is obviously disconcerted and is moving at least 30 miles per hour. He continues to accelerate. The naked Native American runs around the vehicle at this speed and is gone. Restless sleep. A group is camping, and a staff member wakes up to find a Native American standing over him. The Native American says he needs to spend more time with his family. He then uses an obsidian knife to cut the staff on the forehead. The staff wakes up the students and other staff with a scream. He does, in fact, have a cut that is bleeding on his forehead. The other staff member, an older Native American woman with awesome straight white hair, I've met her, She's like 6 feet 4 inches in height, tells him and the group they need to leave this spot immediately. It's still early in the morning, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. The area they are camping in soon becomes listed as private property. They were near a burial site. This staff member did indeed quit and move back home to spend more time with his family. Personal story: my first week in the field, it's summer in July, and we cannot hike when it's over 90 degrees. So we wait until it cools around 7 p.m. to start hiking. We are hiking until 1 a.m., when he needs to fill up the water. The water sources we used are shared with cattle. So often, there is cow slobber or poop floating on the surface. Unrelated, one water source called Jockey, right after we filled up water, a big old bull struts in and takes this massive piss in the water. Anyway, we get to the water source at 1 a.m. It's dark, but the temperature outside is still in the 70s. Perched around this man-made water source on the metal walls are 3 ravens. We could literally touch them if we wanted. At the water source, there is a dead raven floating on the surface. 15 feet away from the water source is a dead cow. It left us feeling very uneasy. We hiked an additional 2 miles to avoid using this water. The fugitive: at one location, groups would camp, and students would tell staff that someone was stealing their food rations. This became commonplace here. So eventually, groups stopped camping here to avoid the lost rations. Weeks or months pass, it's forgotten, and groups return to the spot. A staff member going to make a morning call and hikes up the side of a mountain to get better reception. He finds the remains of a man. This man is sitting upright with a shotgun in his hands. Later we discover that it's loaded. This man had an open gash across his abdomen, spilling his innards before him. No animals have touched or fed on the corpse. Later, we found out that this man was responsible for stealing food from students at night. He had murdered someone and returned to this area to hide. He was familiar with this location from being raised nearby. The FBI and local authorities then came out to identify the person, etc. It's whispered among staff that a Skinwalker was responsible for the death. Typically, in Skinwalker lore, there is a moral scale involved in their actions. If you're a good person, you have nothing to fear, while if you're a bad person, you better watch out. To contradict that statement, I've also heard that there are good and bad Skinwalkers. The good ones look like a healthy and clean coyote, while the bad Skinwalker coyote form looks unhealthy, dirty, and mean. The location where he died was near a recorded Native American pictograph site. We were told that when a man was nearing death and became a burden to the tribe, he would hike to the top of this mountain and make a massive fire. The rest of the tribe would wait and watch from the side of a nearby mountain. The old man would tend the fire until he died. The tribe would know he was gone because the fire would go out. They would recover the body and then bury it 15 miles across the field. Related to this event, some staff heard there was a cave at the top of this mountain, so they hiked to find it. On their trek, snakes continued to cross in front of their path. Taking this as an omen, one of the 2 staff turned around. The other continued, found the cave, blacked out near the entrance, and was awoken as he was tumbling down the side of the hill. Coyote hide: it's winter in the field. We're talking 3 feet of snow, cold, wet, and miserable to be living. I had a friend working with a group, and at night he heard footsteps crunching the snow around the student-made shelter. He thinks it's a student, but like most of us, he dares not leave his warm sleeping bag. So he yells, "Call your number." Whenever a student is using the bathroom or away from the eye of the staff, we have them call their number every 3 to 5 seconds. This way, it's easier to monitor if they take off running through the woods. My friend fell back asleep. The next morning, they got up and found a coyote hiding on the side of the shelter. He brings the frozen hide with him on the ride out as evidence of the event. We determined that while hunting is commonplace in the field and ranchers killing pests like coyotes is too, it seems unlikely that a hunter or rancher would just happen to be passing by at 2 a.m. with a freshly skinned coyote hide. There are so many stories like this. I've heard of other ones that didn't take place in the field. Like a family living out in the wilderness in a trailer that is awoken in the night to hear their dogs barking something fierce. They ignore it and find their 3 dogs dead in the morning. It was heavily suggested we didn't tell the students these stories. Some kids would literally piss their pants in the night, too afraid to leave the shelter to relieve themselves. I guess it was to be expected when we pointed up the hill from the campsite and said, "That is where the Skinwalker killed that guy." Ryan found his corpse with a loaded shotgun in both hands, almost as if the man knew something was out there that night. A while ago, me and my friend were walking around our village, low-key coked up, so weird things were expected, but this was over the top. We first chilled at her house and decided we were in for a walk. It was around 10 or 11 o'clock, so it's not too late yet. She lives on a street near the forest, so walks there are usually very pleasant and calming. We were walking down the road, and we were about to pass this bench we always go to smoke. It was literally by the entrance to the forest. My friend was walking ahead because she was blasting music and jumping around, and I wasn't in for it. At some point, she starts walking even faster, and at first, I don't realize why until I hear her screaming out her friend's name. I realize that supposedly another girl, this mutual friend of ours, is sitting on the bench. I do see a girl sitting, and while I am standing too far away to recognize anything about her, I get an uneasy feeling. My friend is really sure that it's her, as she's cheerfully calling out, and I'm not close enough to notice anything off. That friend often dates at that bench, so it was weird for me to feel worried, but I brushed it off. As we approach the girls, they are not responding, which is weird since we really are close, and I notice something weird. It's not the friend we've been calling at all, and this girl has her hair completely covering her face. First seeing her, I wasn't sure if it was a girl. Then, examining her, I assumed she was some junkie or just a poor girl needing help. She also had her hands kind of in her face, so I thought maybe she was crying, but she was completely silent. I also noticed she had stuff laying by her side, but nothing out of the ordinary, I think, just a bag and stuff. This sight was out of the ordinary because we live in a nice village with, well, nice people? And we know almost everyone around, and she did not feel familiar. I'm waiting for an opportunity to tell my friend to stop without letting the woman hear us and just let her approach further until she also turns and says, "Never mind, that's not her," clearly not seeing what I was. At this point, I first wanted to ask my friend to cross the street and avoid this woman, but out of stress, I tell her we're turning around, and I quickly explain my worries. She agrees that it's weird, and we decide that maybe she's an addict having a bad time or just some homeless person or someone crying, but we both get eerie vibes and headaches. Mind you, this interaction lasted only a few seconds before we decided that something was up. We were also whispering and hearing if there wasn't any movement around. After this short inertia and jumping to the same conclusion, I tell my friend to look around, and the woman is gone, including all her stuff. After a while, we start hearing footsteps, laughter, and eerie music while we keep walking faster and eventually get home. We laughed it off as paranoia, but some details about this story, like her hair, her not responding, her creepy posture, and sitting right next to the forest, were off for me. Also, the fact that we kept hearing stuff but there was no one else out in the streets was kind of weird to me. Also, how she disappeared within a few seconds without making a sound was creepy. What do y'all think? Are we overreacting? It was a cold, misty night in the mountains of the Ozark landscape. My father and I were gathering some firewood for the family. We lived in a cabin that we built ourselves, with my dad being brought up in these mountains by my grandfather and as by my great-grandfather. Our family consisted of my stepmother and my two younger siblings. I was the oldest of my two siblings. I'm currently 21 and own a couple of firearms. We hunt with an 1870 antique Winchester repeater and a Krog Jorgensen rifle, more commonly known as the bolt-action rifle that was passed down by my grandfather and was used to hunt game back when trapping was a big thing in the States. Now we use these weapons as a token of our appreciation for our ancestors. I also use a standard hunting knife and a crossbow whenever I go hunting. We go out hunting often, and we haven't seen much this past winter. We'd see the occasional bear or the occasional mountain lion, but not many deer this season, which was odd as they are abundant in these mountains. While we were gathering some firewood outside, we heard a howl in the distance. I've heard these howls before, and mostly I assumed them to be some coyotes, a fox, or maybe a lone cougar. It was also much colder than normal this night, and as we were chopping the firewood, my father looked at me with sweat dripping down his face. He said, "How's it going over there, champ?" I responded, "Just fine, Dad, it's a lot colder than normal tonight. What do you say we go hunting for game soon? The kids are probably hungry." He responded with a resounding yes, "I think we should, we don't want to keep the family waiting." So we went inside the cabin to gather our weapons. I took my Winchester repeater and my crossbow, and my father took his Krog Jorgensen rifle and his pump-action shotgun. We let my stepmom know we were going to go hunting, and we set off into the cold winter night. We decided to take a trail that was all too familiar to us to see if we could catch ourselves a big buck or a doe, which would be lucky for us. I was walking through the snow, listening closely to anything that could be lurking in these woods. Luckily, it was a clear night, and the moon was full, so I could see ahead of me. In these mountains, we had all sorts of encounters, ranging from bison to cougars, but this time it felt different. The woods were eerily quiet. I felt like something was watching me from the tree line. All I could hear was the beating of my heartbeat and the sounds of our footsteps in the snow. And then we heard it, a loud, very eerie howl that made my blood go cold. I tried to focus on where the sound came from. I looked at my father, and he seemed to be on edge. I asked him, "What do you think that was?" He responded, "I don't know, son, but I think we should keep it quiet and see if we can down a deer for dinner." I noticed his hands were trembling with fright, but it was a good sight to see that he wanted to keep on going, so I went along with him. You see, my dad is fearless, and he's quite a strong man. From what I know, no one would want to mess with him, and to see him want to continue our hunt was a good sign. I kept on listening closely to the sounds that surrounded us as the forest became alive again. I heard something to our left, and up ahead, I saw a deer come into the clearing. It was a buck with a very nice set of antlers. He seemed to not notice us yet. I quickly but quietly got my crossbow out, because I didn't want to frighten the deer. I loaded the crossbow up, took aim at the heart of the big buck, and fired. I saw it pierce through the skin of the buck as he tried to run away with the arrow stuck to his heart. We followed the blood trail to the now injured deer, as it was letting out cries of pain. I took out my hunting knife and, with an act of mercy, put it down. After that, we heard something to the right of us. I looked down into the tree line to see if anything was there, and I heard a low, deep guttural growl. I froze in fear. Whatever it was sounded intimidating, but it was odd, as in Arkansas, the largest animals around here were bison or bears. Whatever this thing was, it did not sound like any predator that hunts in this region. My dad picked up the carcass of the dead deer and put it on his shoulders. He signaled for me to follow him. As we were making our way back to the cabin, I kept hearing heavy footsteps follow us every few meters. I kept looking around to see if I could catch a glimpse of whatever it was. And then I saw it. To the left of me, I saw a huge shape moving slowly by us. It was gigantic. It looked like a grizzly bear to me, but it's odd to see anything this big in these woods. I signaled my dad to look. He turned around and saw it as well and said quietly to me, "Stay close to me, as long as we stay quiet and move quietly, we'll be okay." I responded with a head nod, and we started to sneak our way back to the cabin. We got back to the cabin in 15 minutes. Both my dad and I were on edge as we moved back to the cabin. All we heard was the occasional growling and howl of the creature, as it seemed like it was taunting us. As we moved into the clearing near the cabin, I heard a booming set of footsteps behind me. I looked behind me to see the same creature, except this time I could see it clearly. It looked like a grizzly bear, but with horns and eyes glowing a bright crimson blood red. My dad and I screamed as we ran back to the cabin. We made it just in time to close the door, as whatever the creature was hit the door with brute force. My dad started panicking, putting the deer down, and rushing the kids and my stepmother upstairs. I kept on hearing this creature scratch at the door and, every so often, try to break it down. It roared so loudly that my ears started ringing as it desperately tried to break down the door. I decided I was going to try and scare it off. I went upstairs to my bedroom window, opened it up, and got my Winchester ready. I got the massive beast in my sights as I fired at it. After I hit it, it let out a roar and ran back into the woods, the earth shaking behind its every step. Everything went quiet again after this. I ran downstairs and looked outside to see nothing but large footprints in the snow. I opened the door and looked at the damage the creature caused, and all I saw were huge scratch marks. I then went to the footprints left by the creature, and to my surprise, there was no blood, even though I'm sure I shot it. After this event, I researched more into our history and found out that whatever my dad and I saw that night was what's known as the Ozark Howler. Occasionally we hear its howl at night, but my dad and I have learned to respect the beast. I haven't seen the beast to this day, but, Ozark Howler, let's never meet again. I've lived in or around this area for the better part of over 10 years, though I've spent some time working in different parts of the country here and there. So anyway, this is a fairly rural area, but we have a few annual attractions and whatnot nearby. So, I've never known much about religion and supernatural stuff in my whole life, but I have heard a few crazy stories, like a frog demon at a local fountain. So I never thought I'd ever see or hear anything myself, though I hear we are a very big hotspot. Due to the shifts I used to work, I got into the habit of taking late night walks. But that's kind of an excuse. I was kind of in a small social circle my whole life and have always been a night owl anyway, long before anything supernatural. Out of hundreds of late night walks, I never had anything out of the ordinary happen. Then, all of a sudden, shortly after finding Vic's channel, I started noticing hoots from the woods outside of town that didn't sound like an owl. Some even mimicked passing trains and 18-wheelers occasionally when I was out walking. I don't know the order of the following encounters. However, all of them occurred within city limits, there were no exceptions. Also, rural. Every story has the word rural in it, no exception. First, railroad tracks, late at night. I had seen foxes in and around this area before. I heard something moving in the woods that sounded about fox-sized. It was heading my way, but I never saw it come out of the trees. Even though, at one point, it most certainly sounded like it did, making a beeline for my location. There was an old demolished building base there in a small field, and I heard and felt something small, about knee height, come up to me. I could feel a sort of energetic excitement radiating around the area. It felt like something was literally right in front of me, but I didn't see anything. I'm not sure if I had a phone back then, and I didn't know about orbs at that point. Anyway, whatever it was, I could not see it, though somehow I just knew exactly where it was. I don't remember much else about the experience. It was over a year ago, but less than 4 years ago. Other than that, it was one of my first definitive WTF experiences. It could have been a lot worse. I just remember being more surprised than afraid. Maybe that sets the tone for future experiences. If so, I'm glad for it. This was about the same time I started reading the KJV Bible for the first time in my life. I don't know if that's relevant or not. Second, was walking railroad tracks, probably around 10 p.m., exact same location as number 1, a little further along. I walked by a deep wooded valley, was watching the sky, and saw something I thought was coordinated drones fly out of the woods just above tree branches. It looked about a meter squared or so, completely silent and black. I don't know if it was a solid mass or a bunch of coordinated drones. It turned out like you would imagine coordinated drones would, A few extremities were either lit up or reflecting a light, but there weren't any lights too close by. I had been waving a 600 lumen flashlight around in the sky prior to this, and it flew almost directly over my head. Third, I think this may actually have been the first or second. I remember feeling, for some reason, like a dogman was nearby. Corny, I know. I was like, oh boy, I've gone over the deep end, in the middle of town, thinking of cryptids that are nowhere near here. But just then, as I crossed the darkest part of the street, I thought I saw out of the corner of my eye a muscular clawed arm. I had only glanced in that direction to cross the road, more like an alley, and I knew no trees were there. When I looked back, nothing. I don't know, but it felt weird. Later that same night, near the end of the walk and turning back around, at the furthest end of the same alley, I got the same feeling again, but ignored it and didn't look around. I kept walking in the same alley. Shortly after I passed another dark spot, where I used to hang out with friends years before, I heard a strange sound. I can't compare it to any known sound. It was a deep but shrill sound. The closest I could think of is a non-MIDI version of Skakun from Generation 2, his cry in the Game Boy game. Corny, I know, but as they say, it sounded like it came from everywhere and nowhere. My first instinct, funny enough, was to look up at the trees I was passing under. It literally stopped me dead in my tracks. I remember feeling a sort of telepathic link probing something, like looking in the dark spot behind you to your left, to which I just kind of shrugged off and kept walking to finish my walk. Kind of boring, I know, but I remember feeling a strange sense. I thought I'd be more afraid, but it was kind of surprising. No further incident, though I did kind of feel mapped out, if that makes any sense, like it knew my routine. Fourth, this one is hard to explain. Similar spot as 1 and 2, but further and near a river in a field. I was walking a dirt road and heard some telepathic talk, something about working hard for something versus having faith and allowing things to develop naturally. I remember it making me laugh out loud and stop in my tracks. I started walking again. This telepathic voice seemed behind me, in the trees, and maybe unrelated to what happened next. I've never heard of anything like this. About 1/4 mile further down the road was a light post. When I was approaching it, I thought I saw something come out of the grass. A formless black shape. And it was like crawling. I thought it was like a big black bag or something because it was moving. Odd. It stopped in the middle of the road. Laying kind of flat. Then, it turned and looked at me with huge eyes that either glowed or reflected light. I can't remember if it was in front of or behind a streetlight. It was kind of at the top of a hill, and there was another path if it kept going straight the way it came that went directly down to the river. As soon as it saw me, I couldn't remember what had happened. I just remember being like, WTF? And looking away or something, and then when I looked back, it was gone. And I shit you not, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something black like a robe floating over tall grass towards the water, then kind of take off into the sky. Think of the scene in Harry Potter when Vold flies off after the centaur kicks him in the second movie. It was almost identical, a black sheet just floating up towards the sky. Then, as I panned up, I saw a huge red star or comet-like thing move from straight overhead, I can't remember if it had a tail or not, to approximately 3 to 4 zodiac signs away, about a third of the sky, maybe? I was just like, nope. I was scared of that area for a while after that, not so much anymore, though I had a few more experiences there, but nowhere near as dramatic. Fifth, the last one that's worth mentioning. And call me a dumbass, I felt it. Day after a major festival. We had a monument that got taken down. I was walking, all these take place at night, and saw a dog near the memorial. I was like, okay, it's definitely looking for food from the festival yesterday, and it's a pretty big dog. I'll go down the next street instead. Then I realized, wait, that's too big to be a dog. Like, we don't have any Great Danes this side of town and no stray animals whatsoever, we have a pound. This was a rouge dog. As I got closer, I realized. It came up to my waist easily. A little less than 3 blocks away or so. I started to speed up. It looked emaciated and was moving, oddly. It seemed to totally ignore me. As I got closer, it moved out of the street and onto the grass. I got a good look at it, and its hind legs were disproportionately longer than its front. Or vice versa, I can't remember. Anyway, I remember thinking that it wasn't real for some reason. It kept its head near the ground the whole time and either found something to eat or pretended to. It started making a loud cracking sound, that is, cracking, not crunching. Hard to describe. And again, the noise seemed to come from everywhere at once. I was like, okay. And then I simply walked away again.